Someone wrote live.
Hey folks, well we're going live here. Hopefully
Yeah.
it stays up. Apparently there were some issues on Twitch and or YouTube, so I think it just went down again. Twitch just might have just gone down. Not sure what's going on.
Hold on,
But try refreshing. Alright, they're saying it's working, so
The light is on the camera.
go
well, that
right
just
ahead.
means we're recording.
Yeah, that
It
means
doesn't
we're
mean
recording.
It's live. Yeah, I see us, but
Alright, they say you can see and hear. Go for it. Take it away, Tyler.
I want to give it like 3 more seconds. Okay, all. I'm getting the coughing out of the way because it is there's so much pollen here. I mean, it's I've been alive for 40 plus years now, and I've never seen so much pollen, especially I think this season.
You don't look a day over 20.
I washed my car last weekend, and the next day, literally just the next day, I ran my finger about 12 inches across the car, and I had a physical clump of pollen in front of my finger after just 12 inches on the car. That's how much pollen there is here right now. So all of nature is happy, and the people who live in it aren't always that happy. So let's get this started. We've actually had a very busy week. I actually want to talk about testing right off the bat, since you guys haven't been seeing our usual testing emails going out this week. This week mainly what took a bit of our time at the beginning of the week was the Seattle office. We now have a Seattle office. We'll have a group photo in the update later today. They did a lot of move-in, IKEA trips, buying computers and monitors, anything else that we weren't sending out physically to their homes ahead of time. They are now all set up. They're working. They now have a group buff. What are you two laughing at?
Well, you skipped to number 3.
Oh, well, it's relevant. I'll skip 3 later.
Okay.
My point being that because of this, it took up a lot of our time just setting up the network and everything. So usually Tim and Brittany and I are the people who push all the testing forward. So we didn't do a lot of that this week. We did, however, push forward literally starting today, bringing up all the zones. So probably next week we'll just continue into that and have multi-zone testing, crafting testing, clicking on things to test. We haven't done a lot of the actual just move around the large maps in a long time, and we have new portal features in there and new spawning features. So there's going to be a lot of just kind of general stability testing on that next week once we put out fires as we get everything landed. So let's go into the top 10. Ben is going to, I think, mostly remain quiet for the beginning of this. I brought him on to help me out with design questions afterwards. So typically when it's just me by myself, I tend to skip the design questions because I don't want to make mistakes. I'm not the designers on the game. So he's here. So as we go through these things, if you've got any questions about the top 10 design related, feel free to ask. So number 1, tech archery animation support. So one of the things we've talked about for the last several weeks is Andrew's rebuild of a new animation system and all the new functionality that's been added to it, all the new assets that we've been working on. Scott, myself, and Andrew have been doing a lot of work. Ben gets pulled in for sanity checks of how things should work, even down to how swords and things should be swung. I actually took video today of Scott and Sandra over here playing with swinging swords. So right now Andrew has started looking at how to get the archery animations working, and it's not as simple as what we were doing before, where it's just kind of a plug and play. There's all these phases to the archery system, such as knocking your arrow and then aiming your arrow and then firing your arrow. I got that right?
Yeah, there's a different ability sequence. It's not just the animations.
Yeah. So Andrew had to delve into the ability system a little bit deeper and has begun working on that. Once he actually gets into a place where we see those pieces actually working and we can create those different phases, then Scott will go in and start doing polish on the actual work. And like I said, for all of these things, like I've said several times over the last 2 months, a lot of those animation assets that you may see going in, a lot of those are really quick pass just for testing, just so that we have a guy holding a sword. Now we're going into like what's really going to make these things look great. Number 2, siege engines. So I'm going to kind of read this a little bit because there was a lot of smaller details. Matt got in after a lot of discussions, several code reviews, a big chunk of siege engines in, and at this point, it's being able to spawn a siege engine and use aiming. Obviously, this dovetailed off of the archery work that was done over the last couple of weeks. So now you can just, with a / command, plop a siege engine in there and move it around. The next step is several weeks of work, and that's getting the networking. What did I write here? Networking, realm specific, being able to craft these things, actually making them a real item, the realm variations, persistence, packing and unpacking, and then the actual ability to fire them and build abilities that it uses. So there's still quite a bit of work to go on this, but update for you guys. Number 3 was the Seattle office move-in, so I'll skip down. Number 4, tech particle performance. So one of the things I did, God, it was only last week. There's so much happens every day. Last week I put together a VFX map for George and Dave to basically test performance against. I got an excellent map thumbs up from George, so he started going through and finding low-hanging fruit to fix and improve particle performance, and then we'll continue to use that map as a way to audit and push performance kind of on a second pass. Crafting blocks. This one's a really cool one. It brought a lot of smiles to all our faces, even Ben. Ben has a habit of looking like this a lot of the time. So we were very excited the other day when Ben was able to run out to a node to gather resources, and in this case you were gathering logs. I don't know what log, wood.
Sure.
Take them back, put the Vox down, put the wood down, turn those into planks, take those planks, turn them into a block, take that block, put it into a plot, and build the blocks on the plot, and then I think you switched.
And I just tested that.
Yeah. And then you just switched factions and fired at the blocks.
Yeah.
It
could be
so getting that whole loop put together a lot of systems, and this is one of the things I just want to iterate, that we talked about, like all these big tech systems, and now we're starting to mash them together and make a game. So I think I actually wrote, what did I write at the bottom? Make it feel like a game. So that's going great. Ben is just going to keep working with Christina on continuing on blocks and doing the armor, weapons, and am I missing anything for beta? Armor, weapons, blocks?
For items?
Yeah.
Well, getting the siege engine
And
to
then
be an
siege
item,
engines,
and then the armor and weapons for the characters, and then other miscellaneous items like torches and things like that.
6, items as containers. So one of the things that came out of stand-ups this morning was because the item system is very modular, Christina was able to very quickly set up items as containers so that you can put things inside of something else. So you can think of it in this case, the example I gave in the write-up was like if you had a siege engine and you were putting ammo into it, or arrows in a quiver, or items in a pouch that also went inside your inventory. So that was a great thing that came out of this week. Player inventory. So we started working on dragging and dropping into inventory slots, which will just be your inventory character window. We've got a work in progress of that going on, and Ku is working on a whole myriad of icons. If you look at his screen at any given point during the day, it's just lots of little pictures of lots of different weapons and armor right now. Animation assets. So, as usual, there's a lot of things that happen around this. This week was a lot of taking the jumping and running features that Andrew and Scott were working on last week and adding kind of a new layer of polish. And I say kind of a new layer because it wasn't necessarily just polish existing assets. This also includes adding in new run cycles. When our characters run, like when they go up and down hills, they actually slow down and speed up because they have momentum. We have physics. You go up a hill, you will slow down a little bit. And one of the things that we weren't happy with was just speeding up or slowing the animation clips down. It just didn't look as good. So we actually want your character to transition into a longer gait when he's moving really fast versus running that animation cycle really fast. It looks better. Scott has just continued to run with the freedom that he's been given with Andrew's updates. So that's been really cool. Sandra actually started working on a holding torch idle and we're going to use that. If you go in the game now and you equip a torch, you'll run with it and everything like this and shove it in your face. What we'll do there is Scott will be able to just, with Andrew's tech, override just one arm. Actually, in this case, I think it's the left arm. So that he can take all the other pieces of just running or in combat, out of combat, holding something else in your other hand, and just override the one piece without having to rebuild the entire variations of dagger with torch, spear with torch, shield with torch. We can actually just override one arm. So this will be a good test case for that tech, and then we will use Andrew's math foo if necessary, if the blending looks wonky or something when we override that arm. We also added in, we prepped just a single swing with the torch if you're ever to attack with it, and that brought up a whole conversation with Ben about how we treat certain items that can be used in a combat stance and in a travel stance. If you have questions, Ben can talk more about that. It's not a totally decided system, but we had a conversation about what we would do with it.
Yeah, it just needs some additional feature support.
Yeah. On the environment art side, one of the things we did, if you guys remember ages ago when we did the pine forest, I did a whole bunch of extra little work on that, like pine cones on the ground, branches on the ground, little rocks, little bushes, all different kinds of, dead branches, things like that, that helped make it feel more like a forest. And in that case, I was really trying to balance the poly count of the entire thing, and it worked out great. We ran at a really good frame rate, and we have room to improve that, but I'm always trying to be careful of it. We never did that with the original tree assets, which became our first deciduous forest assets. If anybody was testing during that time, it was the really dark, like, oh my god, this is so cool forest. So Dion this week has been going through not only creating the texture realm variations, but also starting on new variations of trees, logs, dead branches, things that will help make it feel more like a forest. On top of that, she also finished up at the end of last week, start of this week, some of the realm variations for the existing assets of the deciduous 002, which is the autumn-looking forest. So we've got, and I've also been working with Mike this week in testing all the new features that he's getting, which is actually number 11. I'm just going to zoom into that. Mike and I have been sitting, since I sit right next to him, he's been doing a lot of testing of just trying to, you see all these weird things of like, what do two particles that are stuck together and they're moving in different ways, and figuring out all those different, the math and the alignments, and then working with Dave to get new features in the particle editor. And I've been seeing that over his shoulder and going, hey, can you make me this? Can you make me that? So this week was a lot of kind of like, can we get little errant bugs and flying things and wisps moving about the world? And the fun part was he had two particles doing this, which looked great for a butterfly, because I said, can we get a butterfly or a bird just flying in the screen or in the sky? And the fun part about that was we immediately found out, like, the minute we move it, the particles started kind of falling apart. So it was great. It was a great question that helped us find problems. But the interesting part that came out of it is once he kind of started putting like two particles doing something, they started doing these really interesting movements as they move about. And I was like, dude, that could be like a weird, fantasy post-apocalyptic world magic bug or something that's kind of flying drunkenly through the air. So if you ever see a drunk bug, it came from this week. Let's see. I talked about UI icons that James is working on, VFX, and the final one is the TDD Scorpion, which John finished up, which finishes our 3 realms for the Scorpions, and he's working on some basic ammo for them. Just a generic bolt that will attach VFX to. It's not a final thing where, just like we did with arrows, we'll have different types of things that you can build, just like when you build your other weapons. But for right now, testing-wise, it'll get us to a point that we have ammunition we can fire and put some effects on so that it looks pretty and you can very easily see it and verify, yep, I fired that thing through the air. So that's the top 12, i.e. the top 10-ish. Won't be any, we have no testing plan this weekend, as I spoke to. We'll kind of get back into that next week. That's about it. So if you guys have questions, it'd be great if you can stick to these, because those are kind of the things we're working on this week. Shoot away.
All right, folks. Well, while you write up your either art questions for Tyler or design questions for Ben. We're going to play the Q&A intro.
Who are you?
Turn the stove off. Did I hear a dog?
Do you like my shirt?
When are this?
Is this my spleen?
Now it is time to answer some questions.
Okay. Odilvik asks,
That's a great question.
will we have directional torches that illuminate forward and are less visible when viewed from behind by the enemies?
I don't think I'd ever even considered that. It's kind of an interesting idea to have a cup or something blocking it, but I don't know if we could actually do.
Hooded lantern.
The directional light.
it would be like a hooded lantern or something. It would act more like a flashlight.
Yeah, there's a bit of a technical challenge there, and most lights don't actually use, like, if you're walking, they don't always cast shadows. Like, casting shadows from a light source is far more expensive. I don't know. I
Don't
think
we have cast shadows from light sources?
only certain light sources, so like the sun, the moon, those will cast shadows. But if I spawn a wisp particle with a light on it, it will shine through the tree. So it's not every. You're basically having to create a whole new map of shadows in the scene every time an object casts, and then you have another draw call. So it's a really cool idea. I don't know how we would technically solve it. Just to say, I can't see that light going that way.
Yeah, it would just be a directional light.
I mean,
instead of a point light.
technically, what would happen is it would block the light. So if I had the torch in front of me and it had like a cup or something behind it, so that it's kind of like a flashlight poking forward, the problem would be is that from the view behind me, it would kind of work. The only problem is it would technically light the front of my chest still, just with a default light. So I don't know. It's an interesting question that I might probably write down, because we've talked about doing different things with torches or lighting, what the different lights, I think Ben mentioned a long time ago, like just like with quality of sword, you could build quality of torch, how long it lasts, how far its radius is, what color it is, what it does, what it might reveal, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of room for growth there. But this directional thing's interesting.
Adric Artesia has a terminology question, which are Ben's favorite. Why do you use the terms warband and order instead of just guild and party/group?
That was really Mark's thing. Sometimes he likes to differentiate terms specifically because they have a different feature set than the colloquial definition. So if we just said group, then it wouldn't encompass all of the features that groups in our game are going to have. So we call them warbands specifically, so they're calling out as something different that has a feature set that's not exactly what you would get if you were just looking at the equivalent in other games.
Zumos MMORPG asks, what for CU do you feel like would be the maximum duration for hard CC, such as stun/knockdown or stagger/mez?
There isn't really a hard cap on durations of things. So crowd control exists on a continuum. The more control that is taken away, the generally shorter something can be. So stun is total control taken away. You can't move, you can't use abilities, and so those are going to have a shorter duration. Things like slow, where you are slow in your abilities or slow in your movement, you can still move, you can still use abilities, but not as fast as you would previously have been able to. Those will be able to be longer. But we really haven't put any hard numbers down and said that, like, well, stuns will only be between 3 and 5 seconds or something. Those are things that we'll have to do more elaborate testing on. You're not going to see things like 5 minutes of stun or something, but there's not a specific time that we've nailed down already, because we haven't even gotten into really full-scale combat testing yet. We've got still a very basic set of abilities put together. A lot of the functionality in our ability system still needs to be built out. So as we get into more testing and as we work in countermeasures and things that will be able to cleanse off some of these effects and counteract them and have immunities to them and break out of them, we can adjust how long these things last and how severe of a slow actually is, and various different things. So it's a little bit premature to really nail down and say, in the launch of Camelot Unchained, stuns will not be longer than X, because we're really not really ready to get that granular and that final in our definitions of things yet.
Yeah, there's actually like just that type of a question where you're looking for specifics. Doing those things ahead of time, usually kind of means nothing. You generally want a certain goal in mind because so many things are going to change throughout the production of the game that the vision or like a design doc may change as you go. It's the same thing with like how we may solve different ways we do the animations. Oh, you guys came up with this new and interesting thing. That's really cool. Well, that's going to change X. It's always changing. I think it's Nintendo's saying that if you make a lot of design docs, you get really good at making design docs. If you work on making a game, you get good at making games. They're very different things.
Mr. Honest John asks, will there be fjords on the open sea-facing sides of the Viking Islands? How about, dare I say it, interlocking fjords?
Interlocking fjords?
Yeah,
I mean-
they get married and they have kids.
Yeah. We can certainly make fjords. I mean, we are going to be taking a lot of inspiration out of real world things, and then
And our lore.
and coming up with fantastic ways to change them up and make them a fun post-apocalyptic game setting. So yeah, I have no reason to say no fjord.
It's one of the biome types that's on my list that I would like to see.
Fjord.
But it's difficult because of the verticality aspect in the current.
Yeah, so right
iteration.
now, like our terrain system has a lot of room to grow. It gets us what we need right now for Beta 1, but what Ben is referring to is cliffs, the whole verticality. Like, we haven't really hit that yet. We can do a lot of, mountainous pieces and stuff, but even mountains, there's lots of room to grow, so we haven't really tried to exacerbate the issue of, like, big sunken in tall area yet.
Odilvik asks, could torches make it into the game as a main hand weapon type?
That's exact what.
Well, in
I'll
the
let
game,
you
for the
answer that.
most part, there are only a few exceptions. Most things can be used in either hand. Right now, we're just prototyping torches as a left-hand item. For whatever reason, we made them offhand because some things certainly have that restriction, like shields you can only use in one hand. But there's no reason why it couldn't be a torch in either hand or both hands if you really wanted it to. It's probably not going to be a good weapon, specifically because if you had a good torch as a weapon, it would replace like maces or other crushing type weapons. So probably it's just going to primarily be a light source and have some ability to be used as a weapon, if any.
Yeah, it's not meant to
you could
replace
certainly-
clubs and
Yeah.
maces.
You can certainly probably will eventually be able to use that in either hand if that's the thing that you really wanted to be able to do.
Part of the idea here is if it feels like realistically I should be able to whack you with the thing in my hand, we'd like to try and do that. And also part of this is like right now we have it as a left-hand thing because we'd have to double up the amount of time we take in animating these things.
Zarfe, that question would be better directed towards MJ or Andrew or maybe one of the other programmers. Keep it to art and like specific design questions, please.
But yeah, I can actually answer that. Yeah,
Okay.
we are going to do like a future animation showcase. We do want to have the guys talk about it, but we want to get through like the whole slice of life of like where we want to go with the animation system.
I
And
wasn't
then-
talking about his animation question.
Oh, that's what I was looking at.
Read the question before you answer it.
Zarfe asks, regarding the amount of people which are wanting to play CU, are you really able to guarantee that there will be no lag? Because you guys make so many new things like lights, environments, and flashes in the game.
Well, you can never guarantee no lag because that's just an impossibility. But what we can say is that we have a realistic target for the number of players that we want to have in combat and on the screen at one time. We are going to be very careful with our visual effects, with our animations, with all of our armor and texturing and modeling and everything to keep the poly budget down. And performance is a very, very high priority for us. So we expect not to have anywhere near the problem that you see in other games. And if our experience gets degraded to a point where it's not fun and you're experiencing poor performance in large battles, then we've done something wrong. So that's really
And we
important
need
for
to
us to
change
get
it.
right.
All right. Chris Velnor asks, you said gathering is in the build. Is gathering still command-based, or have you introduced a way to interact with the node already?
I'm not sure what command base means. Everything is...
Might mean slash.
Yeah, so primarily there's slash commands to do all of these basic actions. So slash take to take stuff from a node, slash something vox to something to make the vox do something. That'll be eventually built into a UI, hopefully here pretty soon, I think.
And we also, Matt did just get in being able to right click on things. So like right now it's like a slash command to spawn the Scorpion just for testing, but you can right click it to take control over it. So one of the things we talked about was just doing a little an outline or something that you can interact with when you're close enough to it that would tell you I can click on it and do something. After that, it's going to be dependent upon what the thing is, what happens after that, whether it's just a simple click or it pops up a UI or it
So hopefully
does something else.
Hopefully these things will be popping up a UI and you'll be able to see, how much of each resource you have, what resources that you want to put into the Vox, what recipes that you have, and be able to do some selection that way instead of having to memorize or at least pull from some of the testing docs we're going to put out what commands to type in to make something happen.
Sid Manic asks, will different races have a night vision ability since it seems like lighting will have some impact on gameplay?
That's been something we've intended to have, is different races being able to see at night better or worse than some others, and being able to see during the day better or worse than others. It's not something we've gotten quite into yet. We haven't really gotten too deep into the more ancillary features like that in terms of the different races. Different races have different stats. They have different, banes and boons and things, but they haven't really gotten specific gameplay like that because we haven't got that difference in the game in general. Once we do, then we can apply it to races in different ways.
Real Life Gobbo asks, have you thought of making ability components less effective the more they are used, and the components that are not used as often get boosted? That way you may use abilities that you may not normally use.
Not in a direct way like that. That's sort of the way that analysis of metrics works, though, where if you're looking at the game and you're looking at what abilities are getting used, what builds are popular, you can therefore determine that the ones that aren't getting used either aren't appealing for some reason or are just underpowered and people don't feel that they're valuable enough. So you can take that and then boost the things that are being underused and possibly look at if there's too much synergy or if there's just number imbalance with the things that are being theoretically overused or at least are really popular, or alternatively and more favorably look at counters to those things so that we're not just nerfing things, we're actually providing counterplay and making it so that those super powerful things just have counters to them, but that the less powerful things get looked at because they're less popular is a way that we sort of do overall balance, but not in terms of like if you as a player are pushing a certain button, that button gets worse and worse the more you push it, and the less you push something the more powerful it gets. There's sort of some cases where specific abilities do that on a very small case basis where you have like overcharge or burnout or that sort of a thing, but those are very specific. It's not like a global system where like everything works that way.
Lord Katonic asks, will I be able to damage trees if I hit it with a hammer?
So
Trees.
So supposedly someday, what we would like to be able to do is actually have every tree in the game be something that's an actual entity that can be chopped down and turned into resources or damaged or clear cut and wiped away so that you can make room to build on that space or whatever. That's not something that I can really say that we're committed to at this point because that's a technical challenge that has yet to be really analyzed or tested to any degree. But we would like to certainly have a lot more interaction with the environment and allow players to do sort of things like that, of like getting rid of the trees if they want this area to be clear. But we haven't gotten into it yet, so we can't really say what the final solution on that will be.
Well, so I'm going to jump in on this.
Okay.
So the question about whether we're going to have individual trees versus the ability to burn down forests. We know we're going to do the latter. We know you're going to be able to destroy your people's other realms' forests to change your own land. The question is, how is that accomplished? It's not just want to make sure that they understand. It's not a question of whether we're going to have it. It's just a question of how we're going to do it. And there are some interesting ideas that I know Andrew has had for how to do with it, how to do that. And we've talked about other things. So it's going to happen. It's just a question of what form it will take.
Can they hear him okay?
Yes, I
Okay.
specifically asked them that. Zumos MMORPG asks, Ben, how do you feel about siege weapons that are designed to kill enemy players? I personally always feel like they generally are too few skill and take away from the combat system as you are killing players with siege instead of your actual skills.
So that's certainly a tricky case in most games, where if siege engines are just super powerful against players, they sort of supplant the role of players in actually using their own abilities and playing their own classes. I think what you have to focus on is making sure that siege engines focus on like a different context. So if a Scorpion, for example, has range well beyond what a normal archer would have, because it's basically a giant crossbow compared to, you know, a bow or a crossbow or something that an individual, you know, person would be able to carry with them. That's not replacing what players can do. It's doing something different than players can do. But we'll have to look at how powerful a lot of those things are and make sure that there's not a case where you especially want to use siege engines when really you should just be playing your own characters. Siege engines primarily are going to be something you want to use in actual siege battles against structures and contexts where players are, you know, running around inside of structures and things like that. So mostly when you're fighting other players, you will probably be wanting to use your own class abilities, but there will probably be some cases in which siege engines being focused against players will be a viable strategy.
The backers have noticed that interlocking fjord marriage is confirmed.
This is why I love people. That's awesome.
Toto Tata wants to know how deep the oceans will be. I don't want to see the bottom.
Okay.
Easily done.
Yeah, sure.
Like there has to be like a...
There's going to be a lot of fun to play with, just like, you know, different heights of the terrain and stuff, and we talked about little islands and stuff all on kind of on the same zone, and being able to see like little sandy areas and stuff, and then obviously we got to drop it off at some point.
Paul Tober asks, has there been any talk about how gory combat will be?
There's been talk about it. I don't know that there's been a final answer on what our...
We're not going for it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line.
Briar C asks, will you be able to pick your character's dominant hand upon creation? And will it have a different combat style, since a left versus right while facing each other will have weapon on weapon rather than weapon on shield?
We haven't really gotten to that degree of specificity in our character attributes, such that handedness is a necessary thing. Like I've said before, there are certain weapons that currently have hand restrictions, so shields are left hand only, spears are right hand only. That's mostly due to animation concerns, where by allowing both hands you have to have way more animation possibilities. Right now our characters are posed in a way that is left foot forward, that is, your defensive item is more weighted to your left side, so that's just the way that locomotion works. If we were to reverse that, we would have to redo all of our locomotions for right foot forward. So it's a thing that we could potentially do, but there's not a whole lot of benefit to it right now. We'll see where we get to on our animation system and see if that's something we really want to approach in the future. But right now, no, you don't really have a handedness to your character. If you're using a sword in your left hand and a sword in your right hand, you use them with equal effectiveness.
Toto Tata has a classic question. How pitch black will caves be, and how will you deal with third-party gamma-controlled programs?
Oh, yeah. I mean, caves should be black. You're going to have a light source in there. Third-party programs or gamma correction or anything. We've talked about doing a vision system, which we haven't gotten too far into, where we literally just don't show you the guy if you can't see him. If the rules of the game say you can't see that guy, we just don't draw him. He won't be there. You can't turn it up and then spot him out in the darkness.
Ulfhog asks, will items be able to be dropped in the world as a real object as promised? If so, for how long, and what kind of objects will be able to be dropped? Boots, ballistas, resources, consumables.
Yeah, I don't know. We both can kind of talk about this.
Yeah, right now you can. Basically, any item that's in your inventory, you can drop on the ground and it just sits there. And I don't think anything even has a timeout right now.
Yeah,
where
there's
it goes away.
there's no
So,
timeout. We've talked about decay.
We sometimes get servers that are very cluttered with when people drop stuff all over the place, but we can clean it up just by...
Yeah, like
There will be a timeout. Okay?
Yeah,
in the
we'll
future,
have to
we're
come
not
up with
worried about
something.
it.
Well, we've said not in all cases, because
Correct.
on your plot, if you're going to drop off a bunch of resources at your house, it's just going to stay there.
Correct.
But if you're just dropping things out in the world so that we don't have a world cluttered with stuff, it eventually
Exactly.
will expire.
Yeah, we're going to hit, we do want you to be able to have a big battle and have stuff be lying on the ground that you might want to scavenge and find. And we'll have to hit, frame rate issues of all that stuff on the ground. We'll probably put them in bags or something, groups and stuff, but we haven't gotten too far into an actual decay rate on those items.
Mr. Honest John has a follow-up for the fjords. Are Icelandic-inspired assets for environments on a list somewhere? Think moss-covered porous
Yeah.
volcanic rocks, black sand beaches, sulfur vents, etc.
Yeah, I've got a dark gray, black sand rock inspired list of assets on my to-do list.
And don't forget herring.
Oh, herring, yeah. We need them in the water.
Uh,
Just because.
Lev-
No, all
Go
that,
ahead.
all that fun stuff. Anything that's kind of like inspired by a specific area that is taking inspiration for the game. Yeah, there's a list of those things. Right now, we're still balancing making new things and making sure that it works.
Lev Valine, I am reading questions on the YouTube chat. I'm just getting them from both places, so I'm going in order. Let's see.
There were two questions about firing projectiles that are easy to answer. Firing projectiles. The question was, will firing projectiles hit trees and anything like that? And
including ones fired from catapults.
yeah, everything, all those things are physical structures in the games. They have collision. They're all consistent across the network, including the actual projectile itself. That's one of our cool tech challenges that we've hit, which is when you fire that arrow, everybody's going to get that update, and you will actually be able to, arrows will sometimes hit each other. Things that are in the air can hit each other. It's also part of the air system that we talked about. If you look on the website, there's a bit of an overview of the air system. So projectiles can hit each other. So if you see a big, slowly meandering thing, it can be interacted with. And you may have to be a really good shot.
Brando2 asks, the character/target UI stream on Wednesday had some great work on the second pass. Has there been any further narrowing on desired design since then that is getting closer to the one for starting beta 1?
Yeah, we'll have another review of that coming up next week. And we will probably try and stream it. I can't guarantee that, but we'll probably try to.
Lotaween asks, how soon can we expect to see guards appear in testing?
Not soon at this point. We've still got a whole bunch of things that we really want to make sure that we get. We really want to get the look and feel of combat before we worry about non-player character entities.
Odilvik asks, will it be possible to target certain missiles that are slow but powerful and shoot them down prematurely or deflect them?
That was the one I was referring to.
Okay.
So yes.
All right. Zube asks, can I build my house on a tiny plateau and have a bridge leading to it?
The place where you built the bridge would have to be on your plot. I don't think that that's impossible, but it would be rather precarious of a place to put your house, I think.
Abducted Gaming asks, when it comes to the ability creation system, what things have you already considered as possible issues or challenges for designing the UI?
Well, there's a lot of them. I mean, the ability system involves such a degree of customization that constructing your abilities in the first place is challenging, because you have to sort of know, with all the different types of components, when you slot something into one slot and you slot something else into another slot and you slot something else into another slot, how that's all going to come together. It's something that's not in other games, so when you're used to playing other MMOs where you're just given your abilities and you just push the buttons to use them, in this game you have to actually construct them and know what all the subparts do. It's challenging to display that in a UI that will be intuitive to people. The balancing ramifications of having not only hundreds of abilities, but potentially thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of combinations that players will be able to put together will be challenging for us to sort of keep track of and run metrics against and things. The way that players will be able to read what other players are doing when their abilities are custom created, both through their visual effects and sounds and animations, and through the user interface and the unit frames and any other sort of UI elements, is going to be challenging. So there's a great deal of things that are difficult for our ability system specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us have to be a glutton for punishment in working on MMOs, but particularly these challenges, I personally find them exciting and trying to figure out. I mean, literally Ben went from UI to VFX to sound. How are we going to be able to tell that, you know, the guy created a fireball that has more tracking on it than the other guy's fireball standing right next to him? There's a lot of challenges, and obviously information overload in the UI is going to be a concern.
Adric Cortege has a follow-up about left and right-handedness. Do you still have the plan to implement double shield skills?
So that was for a subclass of the Viking fighter before we changed the way that we were doing our classes. Right now, that hasn't made it into a specific class. It's still an idea that's on our radar, but there's not a specific ability that's been designed to use that at the moment, because it would have to be completely custom, right? So we have the ability for everyone to basically use a shield. We don't have the ability for just everyone to use 2 shields, and to make that as an ability that's specific to one class means making an animation and an item restriction, basically, so that only one specific class can do something special. It's not something that we've really gotten into yet. Now, eventually, when we get into, the Dullahan throwing his head around and like all kinds of crazy things that really are class specific, we'll be looking more into the later, more advanced mechanics of different classes, and that's one of the things we'll look at. Is if we want to have
these things haven't been
double
thrown
shield
out.
or split shields.
They're very much. We just need to get everybody beating on each other with the basics, and even then, we're going beyond basics with all our different weapon combinations.
Dylan the Wizard, your question has a question about tech in the UI. Direct that towards JB next time he streams. He streams usually on Wednesdays or Thursdays when he does stream, and he can answer that for you. Lev Valine on the YouTube chat has a question whether there could be dry twigs in a forest that stealthers could step on and reveal their presence. And in a bit more detail, I'm thinking more of if there can be typical visible environments that people can learn to avoid so as not to make sounds that betray them.
So we've talked about that to some degree, not as far as looking at individual twigs on the ground and stepping on them, but like having collision volumes around bushes so that you make a certain sound when you step into a bush. So if you walked around the bush, you wouldn't make that sound. Stealthers specifically are supposed to be heard rather than seen a lot of the time. So if you can hear them making noises in the environment, that might be a way to detect them without actually being able to see them. Again, that's a thing that's further along down the line. That's not going to be in for Beta 1. We don't even have stealth on our task list for Beta 1. But later on, that's something that we'll have to look into depending on what the server load is and how granular we can get with having environments that are reactive to players, touching certain objects.
I like Odovek's question about pollen spells. Will pollen spells make it into the game?
As long as we can cast them on Tyler.
Actually, he does have a follow-up there. Perhaps seasonal veil corrupted pollen clouds that make areas and certain plants something you'll want to avoid getting too close to. Systemically, that is something that's on the radar because we have to put... we need a volume inside the first place of power so that you can walk into it and get an effect on you. Doing so, ideally, then we work that into something that we could add into terrain models so that we could actually build out a plant that has a poison cloud of pollen around it, and you walk through it and get debuffed in some manner. So it's on that type of thing is on the radar.
Yeah, there's sort of 2 features there. One of them would be like literally that, where there's just a volume, and if you walk into the volume, you get an effect. The other would be if the plant itself was like an NPC, where the plant did
Attacked
something.
you.
Yeah, it'd basically be an
Triggered.
attack, right? Where it's basically when you get close to the plant aggroes on you and then does an ability to you. And again, I think a lot of that is just determinant on what the performance implications of those sorts of things are. We talked about, we need to be able to support large battles. We need to support having as little lag as possible. So if we throw in a bunch of these environmental hazards and we see our performance is really degrading, those are the things that are going to get cut, because it's more important that players fighting players works really, really well. And even if we don't have as many of these, crazy environment things going on, that part of the game needs to work really, really well. But we'll see what we can do. And in crazier places like the depths, that's something that you will certainly see, because it's a lot more of a
Contained.
enclosed. Yeah, the environment is more specifically geared to that.
Hundreds of
so
kilometers.
It's not just a wide open space where you're going to have these over a very, very large distance that they're all being communicated to your client at the same time, things like that.
Dreege L asks, can you detail again the body part health bar implications in a situation example? As a warrior with a sword in my left hand and a shield in my right hand, if my bar reaches 0 in left hand, will I die? Will I lose the capacity to use any sword-related abilities, but could still use shield ones? Will I use any abilities with hands?
So your body parts are left leg, right leg, torso, head, left arm, right arm. So there's not hand specifically, except that there is an armor slot for your hand in which your damage to your entire arm is partially based on the hand, forearm, shoulder, I think, are the 3 arm slots. So
I'm helping.
Your hand armor will make some difference there, and there might be at some point abilities that target specific armor slots and only factor in the armor from that slot when dealing damage to the body part that they're relevant to. But when you suffer damage to, say, your arm, and you're using abilities that are tied to that arm, eventually, like right now, all it does is if you take damage to arms, it takes damage to both arms at the same time, because we don't have a left-right locational determining system yet. So we can't say positionally were you on the left side of the character or the right side of the character when you attack their arm, and which arm should it affect. Eventually that should be the case, but for right now it just affects both arms. Eventually, the idea though is when you're taking damage to the arm that you're using to perform certain abilities with a weapon equipped to that appropriate hand, that ability will get slower, so you'll lose preparation recovery on that ability. So not based on your damage, but based on the wounds and the wound thresholds that you've sustained. So if you've taken, a third of your damage, you'll take 1 wound. If you've taken 2/3, you take a second wound. If you do all the way to 0, you've taken 3 wounds, and each wound is successively more severe. So if you're functioning with 0 hit points in your arm, you don't die. You might have blood loss, which will eventually cause you to die, but just based on that health bar, it doesn't actually kill your character, but it will make your abilities function a lot less effectively, because they effectively just take longer. So you're losing DPS, or you're losing ability activations per minute, or whatever your metric is of things that you're trying to do with things from that hand.
Zumos MMORPG asks, to both of you, which of the 9 Beta 1 classes are you most excited to start playing when Beta 1 is reached?
Either the Stone Healer, or maybe Forest Stalker, because I like the name. I mean, I always like the idea of playing like kind of behind the scenes sniper. I mean, we've talked about archery as kind of like the scouting, and then we've talked about them as the a DPS. There's a lot of different things you can build your character for. I always like the idea of being able to just stand in the back and snipe people. And the Stone Healer throws rocks at people. That's awesome.
I think I would probably say the Black Knight, because that's sort of the class that is the core of the combat system. That's been like the standard that everything has been based around. So the first abilities in the game were made for the Black Knight. He's got sort of the standard, so other characters are more lightly armored or have better regeneration or whatever, but he's like the basis, right? So if that character is in a good place and really has all of their things figured out, the other characters that are sort of offsets from that character will be also very good. It's not quite as true when you get into the other archetypes. So when you get into archers and stuff, archers are sort of offset from like fighters in general, but the Black Knight is sort of the core of the fighter trio. So that's been, at least in terms of the very, very early development, where everything sort of started with. So if we can get that first character to a place where that's really good, then the other characters falling in line with that, and relative to that character showing their strengths and weaknesses.
So let's say he falls in the line. Who's your second?
I think the second would probably be the Physician, because the Physician has a replenishment mechanic for his resources that is very different. All of the healers are really interesting, so that's going to be sort of hard to say. But the physician is going to have files to manage and consumables that are built into his healing mechanic. That's going to be, I think, a bit more challenging to balance out versus the other two. So the stone healer, like you said, just
It's fun.
Yeah, well,
He's
gonna
also
be
got some
interesting because
really
he has
interesting
deployables,
abilities.
right?
Yeah, deployables are
So
awesome.
that's going to be interesting. The Force Stalker for the same reason, because he's sort of deploying stuff in the world.
I'm
That's
also
gonna be
really,
interesting.
honestly, I have to say, I really want to see like DB put or have DB put in like a coconut knock sound when I heal you, nail you in the head and heal a wound or something. Cure a wound.
Ammer1 asks, will there be the opposite of a stop a slow-moving missile effect where you could speed it up with a buff or something?
Yeah, perfect example. The
Fireball and
the
Windwall.
previous iteration of the air system, which was just not really what we wanted to do. It's part of why we rebuilt the ability system. We're going to have to get back into the air system at some point here. But when we were testing some of the interactions, a really good example was people would create like a wind wall that basically created a force forward. So if something was coming at you, you'd see players lob a fireball and it would kind of do this if you had basically protected yourself if its momentum was not enough to carry it through the wind wall and hit you. The opposite was true, that if you were at a distance and you couldn't quite hit your target, someone could stick that wind wall in front of you and then you could fire through it and it would actually launch those projectiles farther, i.e. faster.
Zumos asks, will you have a scrolling combat text ready for Beta 1?
So there is a combat log in the current version, so you can see how much damage you did, how much healing you did. All that stuff is present in there. There's a system log as well, which is a bit more verbose. It gives you more specific information. That's something that's going to be changing over time. But yeah, there is a combat log, which would be basically your scrolling combat text, so that you can see all the things that you did. Most especially, it's in there for debug purposes. So if you think that something is doing way more damage than it should, way less damage than it should, that's where you would look into probably the system log to see exactly what happened.
Zyruz asks, can you shield throw like Captain America?
Here, wait, let me help.
Thank you.
Been
Yeah.
talking a lot about animation recently.
Yeah, and that, again, that's another thing that would be in animation. So we don't have any throwing of handheld weapons at the moment. We're doing right now just archery, getting that to work as far as characters instantiating projectiles. So we didn't make any animations specific to throwing stuff. That's a thing that we'll approach at some point in the future. Historically, it's kind of ridiculous to throw shields. There are a few examples of it, like specifically from Viking sagas, where that actually did happen. So it might be something that we approach at some point in the future. Probably not quite Captain America, but it's something that we could approach at some point.
Yeah, Scott and Sandra, I believe, did a quick pass on just like a dagger throw animation. Problem is then you lose your daggers. It is going to hit the person and then probably land on the ground. We haven't gotten that far in the actually what happens with the projectile at that point, but it's been discussed.
Toto Tata asks, can you throw other players?
There's not technically a throw player ability, but we are going to be building towards the mechanics to do so for sure. Once we have to get through the Scorpion Siege engine and get those working, and then we can actually start getting into variations, which could be something like a catapult, which you could certainly throw someone.
Yeah, I think there's two possibilities on there. One of them is standing on a siege engine, then you would go flying through the air. The other one is just physics impulse abilities, like if you had a very strong
several air walls.
Yeah,
or
like
something.
air wall or something,
Yeah.
where there's an actual ability that does something that causes you actually like picking up a character and like throwing them physically. Again, is another thing with animations and like synced animations that would be really, really advanced. It's not something that we especially do in our game, which is have one character actually touch and manipulate another character, because that's IK stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the really interesting thing is I see this on our streams or other people's streams talking about the games that they're building. You always start going into this next level of detail, and it's up to us as the developers to say, well, there's a lot of pieces there that kind of have to be put together. And so at the start I love all the excitement and everything, but we have to sometimes tamp those down and say, well, we're not quite there yet. Like when Ben gives the example of like, oh, what happens if I huck someone into someone else? Well, then we have to do these paired animations and like, am I catching you? Am I actually grabbing you and throwing you? That player loses control of their character. Do they like that? There's a lot of little pieces there that are really exciting to figure out, but we're not all the way there. But the best example, probably the earliest example that we would do this with, would be put a catapult, rig it, and once we've got the scorpions working and actually you stand on it, and I don't see any reason why with our physics system it shouldn't huck you through the air.
Well, it depends on if it's just an animation or if it's actually moving things through space, right? Because if the catapult arm is an actual physics object, then
Yeah.
it would.
Yes.
But if it's just entity playing an animation, then it doesn't do anything. Just
Right.
like a sword swing doesn't physically, the arm doesn't physically impact the other character if they're standing right in front of you. It's just a character playing an animation.
Yeah, we've
So
talked
we'll have to
about
figure it out.
We've talked about it. We're going to do it. We'll figure out exactly how it's going to work.
Yeah, but it is something that is supposed to work. You're supposed to be able to stand on a siege engine and get yourself thrown through the air. Whether it's a good idea for you to do that or not, because you'll take falling damage, is up to you.
5-minute warning.
It just makes me think of all the weird combinations you can do with the ability system. Like, okay, light the dude on fire and then huck him into the castle.
5-minute warning, folks. Ledvaline asks, those who start out early will learn a lot about the ability system. Will you still be able to add new things later that the old fogies might overlook, as they'll be too set in their old-timey ways?
Yeah, like one of the interesting things about the ability system is that as we add even one new component, right, that adds potentially dozens or hundreds of new possibilities because it can be combined with all of the existing components. So even small changes can sometimes make a really, really big difference. There's not a specifically intentional reason to do that, because we want players who start early to understand the game, to be able to give us feedback, to be able to write documentation so that newer players coming in will have some basis for what they're doing, so they don't have to just try and figure everything out for themselves, all from scratch. But if you start out the game, right at launch, and then you only use the builds that were good right at launch, and you don't adapt to things that are going to happen in 3 months or 6 months or a year down the line, you're probably going to get a bit dated, and people are going to have counter builds to the ones that were initially popular, even if there's no new abilities created. There are going to be post-launch classes, so those are going to come out, and you might need specific adaptations to deal with those classes. So a lot of things are going to change. You're probably not going to be best off, making an initial call on here's all the best things, here's my, optimal build, and then just sticking with that indefinitely, because you're going to have to adapt a little bit at least to changing rules and changing situations as they become available with the availability of both new classes and new abilities for existing classes.
Lotaween asks, in the long run, in addition to moving around based on ownership, is there a possibility that an island will occasionally sink into or appear out of the ocean to keep the map fresh for many years to come?
I just read it and I was reading other questions. This was the islands coming in and disappearing.
Yes.
Yes.
There's really no reason we couldn't do that. I mean, the whole plan with the islands is being able to move them. So, story-wise, saying like, oh, this appeared, there's no reason we couldn't do that with the tech that we're doing. We'd just be building in a new island.
So we have to be a little bit careful with that, because buildings or islands include buildings, right? So if you've built your house on an island and then we decide that island is going away, then your house is permanently
Yeah, I didn't
gone,
actually say
right?
sinking in my version. I was just saying like, yeah, spawning a new one. Sinking one, yeah, there's a lot of...
Well, you don't want your play space to balloon, right? So if we just add and we never remove, then there's a bunch of more space in the world than there was previously, and so the population gets spread thinner and thinner across more and more space if space never goes away. So removing space is something that will probably happen, but we'll have to be very, very careful with, so that you know well ahead of time that it's going to happen, and there's maybe measures that you can take even to prevent it from happening, so that if you don't want it to happen, or you have some say in which space goes away, we'll have to look into doing that. But we do want the ability to add new things, and that may be revising old things so that an old island gets sort of remade and revised, or it might be actually removing old islands and adding new ones. But again, because housing is a thing in our game, we're going to have to be very, very careful with old spaces going away because we don't want to take away people's claims and people's plots and the work that they've done on their housing.
All right, I'm looking for one last awesome question. Hopefully, one that both these guys could have an answer to.
And then we have boxes.
Oh, and that's right. We are going to open some boxes on stream. Let's see.
There's an interesting one from Amarone.
Amber 1?
Amber 1, yeah.
Read it out.
Playing War, one of my favorite skills was Guard, because it takes a single player and makes them much more, and the enemy had to learn to deal with that, i.e. knockback. The Guard tank out of range of the healer or the softie, and then try to kill the softie before the tank got back into Guard range. So are there similar mechanics or skills in place that will really become strategies of their own? I love these kinds of things because it goes beyond the FOTW, what's that?
Flavor of the week.
Flavor of the week. Builds to more of a complete group synergies.
Yeah, so Guard was a pretty good mechanic, and we used that in SWTOR as well. There's abilities like that. I don't know if that's... The exact mechanic of that is probably not going to be duplicated the way it was specifically in Warhammer, but there will be abilities like that, where proximity matters, where specific ties to other characters matter, and where your relative positioning can have an effect, and your disruption of the positioning of opponents so that they are spread apart from each other or are too close to each other to be able to do certain things will make a difference. So there will be hopefully some very interesting class synergies and counterplays within our system based on what actions you take, where you're standing, who you're close to, who you're far away from, that will create some interesting gameplay situations with how you position yourself relative to other characters when combat is happening.
Cool.
Great
Well,
questions.
You want to open some boxes?
Okay, so we have a couple of boxes here that are off camera from Ludovic, which we're going to open. I'm going to open one, and Ben's going to open the other one. That's my plan.
That's not a good...
That's a good plan.
I don't think this is...
These are heavy. This one's for you, Ben. As I understand it, they're related, so we're going to open them up kind of at the same time.
Related?
Yeah.
Do we...
I'm confused. Oh, now I know. All right, so I'll give you guys a hint because it took me a second. Even though he told me what these were, I forgot momentarily when I saw it was in the box.
Okay.
That
I
should
don't
help
understand. What is it?
out. This is for pouring out of a bottle.
Is this a drinking?
There's a whole bunch of those.
What is this?
Oh, jeez. All right,
Why
so.
is this a thing?
So I have a very heavy container that says Hawaiian snow cone shaved ice, which I think because it's so heavy and that's the actual machine, this is a snow cone maker, a professional quality snow cone maker. And oh yeah, here we go. Here's the 10 flavor pack because it's summer and people like the work we're doing, Ben.
Thank you, Ludovic.
Thank you. Very, very awesome gift. I will definitely get pictures of everybody jumping in on this thing. Actually, we should set it up today. We got time.
Says the producer.
Says the producer, yeah. No, awesome. Very cool. Like I said, we'll get pictures of it. Thank you very, very much. 10 flavors. How will I pick? So that's about it. Thank you very much for the gift. Thanks for hanging out with us for the top 10. Thanks for hanging out with us for questions. Thanks, Ben, for joining me today.
Yay.
So you could answer design-specific questions that I would possibly muddle. That's about it. Like I said, we'll be pinging you guys probably next week around testing very large islands. We've got a little preview in today's update. I put a temporary map for testing that Michelle put together. and don't think it's the real map. It's just a map for testing and running around on the map on the different zones.
Keep an eye out for the update, and we will see you
Yeah,
later.
we'll have update top 10 user stories and pictures.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, we gotta go sit.